Hey, so tonight we're going to talk about something that'll make you super grateful for that hot shower you took today. We're diving into Victorian hygiene. And trust me, it's going to be a wild ride. Think fancy dresses and top hats. Yeah. Well, let's just say what was happening underneath those beautiful clothes was the not so beautiful. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from. So drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Always blows my mind how people are falling asleep to this all over the world. Alright, find that cozy spot, take a nice slow breath, and just let your body sink into whatever you're lying on. We're heading back to 1850-some London, and trust me, you're going to be real grateful for that mattress by the time we're done. So, congratulations. You just woke up in Victorian London. The first thing that hits you isn't what you see. It's what you smell. That thick, heavy, almost chewy air that seems to stick in your throat. It's like, well, imagine if someone took every smell you've ever tried to avoid and mixed them all together in a big steaming pot. Human waste, rotting garbage, smoke from thousands of coal fires, and something else. Something sweet and sick and wrong that you can't quite place. You shift slightly in your bed, whatever bed you're lucky enough to have, and immediately feel how different everything is. The sheets. If you have sheets, feel rough against your skin, scratchy, nothing like the soft cotton you're used to, and they smell well. Let's just say fabric softener won't be invented for another century or so. Good news, you're alive. Bad news, well, basically everything else. Let's start with where you are. If you're poor, which most people were, you're probably sharing a room with. Oh, maybe 6 or 8 other people, could be your family, could be strangers. Doesn't really matter because privacy is pretty much a luxury only rich folks can afford. The room is maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, that's it. And everyone's just there breathing each other's air. Sharing each other's, well, everything. The walls are damp, always damp. There's this weird green stuff growing in the corners that nobody talks about, but everybody pretends not to see. Your breathing naturally slows in and out as you take in this strange, smelling new world. If you're middle class, and lucky you if you are, things are better. You might have your own bedroom. Maybe even your own bed, but better is relative. Your house still doesn't have running water, still doesn't have electricity, and that bathroom you're thinking about, yeah. That's not really a thing yet. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Everyone in this era thinks they're clean, like genuinely believes they're maintaining good hygiene. It's just that their definition of clean is, well, let's call it different. Take bathing for example. You know that daily shower you took, that long, hot, relaxing wash where you shampooed your hair and scrubbed every inch of your body. Forget it. Not happening. In fact, if you suggested taking a full bath every day, people would think you were genuinely insane. A comfortable sigh escapes because even thinking about their bathing schedule makes you appreciate that warm shower even more. See, Victorians believed that bathing too much was actually dangerous, like medically harmful. They thought all that water would weaken your constitution, make you sick, maybe even kill you. So, most people, they take a full bath maybe once a week if they were fancy. If they were poor, maybe once a month, maybe. But here's the thing, they weren't just sitting around dirty. They had this whole system worked out. It was called a sponge bath. And basically, you'd wash the important bits. Face, hands, armpits, and other naughty bits. That was it. Everything else? Well, everything else could wait until bath day. Picture this. You're standing in your bedroom because that's where most people wash next to a little wooden stand with a bowl and a picture of cold water. Cold. Because hot water on demand, that's basically magic at this point. You pour the water into the bowl. Grab a cloth or a sponge and you just spot clean like you're detailing a car. But the car is your body and the detailing is minimal. Your shoulders drop, releasing some of that tension as you imagine how different their mornings must have been. The wealthy folks, they had it a bit better. Some of them had these fancy copper bathtubs that servants would fill with hot water carried up from the kitchen. But even they weren't bathing daily. Maybe twice a week if they were real hygiene enthusiasts. And get this, multiple people would often use the same bath water. Dad goes first, then Mom, then the kids in order of age. By the time little Billy gets his turn, that water is, well, let's just say it's more like soup than water. Teaching people how to take a bath. Can you imagine? Bath for Dummies. But in 1858. These books had rules because apparently that could kill you. Don't wash your face when traveling unless you can purify the water with alcohol or ammonia first. Take Russian baths where you wash your face with extremely hot water, then extremely cold water to prevent wrinkles. Getting more comfortable now, settling deeper into your bed. And honestly, their bathing advice sounds exhausting. Now, let's talk about teeth. Oh boy, let's talk about teeth. Toothbrushes existed, but they were expensive. And how do I put this? Not great. They had wooden handles and bristles that were basically just really stiff animal hair. Like imagine brushing your teeth with a tiny scrub brush. One that costs about as much as you'd spend on groceries for a week. So what did poor people do? Well, they got creative. Some people used celery. Just chewed on celery and hoped for the best. Others made their own toothpaste out of chalk, soot, or powdered cuttlefish bone. Yeah, cuttlefish bone in your mouth on purpose. And if you had a toothache, well, good luck with that. Most places didn't have dentists. Instead, you go to your local barber or blacksmith. The same guy who cuts hair and shoes horses is now going to poke around in your mouth with whatever tools he's got handy. No anesthesia, no proper training. Just hope for the best and try not to scream too loud. A yawn escapes and you're suddenly very grateful for modern dentistry. Hair washing was its own adventure. Remember, no shampoo. So, what did people use? Well, eggs. Women would crack eggs over their heads and work the yolks into their hair like they were making breakfast on their scalp. Then, they'd rinse it out with pitchers of water. The smell must have been interesting. Other popular options included vinegar mixed with water, black tea, rum, or rosemary. Basically, if it was in the kitchen and liquid, someone probably tried washing their hair with it. The wealthy had access to fancier concoctions. But even they were basically making their own shampoo out of whatever was lying around. And here's the kicker. They only washed their hair maybe once a month. Maybe. Women's hair was considered their crowning glory, so they'd pile it up in elaborate styles and leave it that way for weeks. They'd add oils and pomades to keep it healthy. But well, those oils would go rancid after a while, so their beautiful hair would smell like rancid fat. Lovely. You shift slightly, finding a more comfortable position as you think about how different their daily routines must have been. Whole other nightmare. No washing machines, obviously. Everything had to be done by hand. And soap was expensive. So, people got creative. Oil stains were treated with chalk. Blood and grass stains were removed with kerosene. Other odor were fought with milk. And for bleaching, well, they'd soak their clothes in urine. Human urine. Because urine contains ammonia, which is actually a pretty good cleaning agent, but still urine. The whole process took forever. You'd haul water, heat it up, scrub everything by hand, rinse it, and then hang it to dry. A full wash day could take all day. Literally all day. So, most people only did laundry once a week if they were lucky. Some people went longer, which means, well, people wore the same clothes for days at a time, sometimes weeks. That beautiful Victorian outfit you're picturing. It probably hadn't been washed in a while. Nice and easy, just breathing and thinking about how much effort it took just to stay basically clean. Let's talk about underwear, or well, the lack thereof. Most poor people didn't wear underwear at all. None. The wealthy might have linen undergarments, but even those weren't changed very often. And women's clothing. Oh boy. Layers and layers of heavy fabric. Corsets that hadn't been washed in months. Petticoats that let's not even think about petticoats. All of this clothing would absorb sweat, body odor, food, smells, smoke from fires, everything. And it would just stay there trapped in the fabric until the next wash day, which remember might not be for weeks. So, picture walking down a London street in the summer. Hundreds of people, all wearing heavy, unwashed clothing, all smelling like, well, themselves, plus whatever they'd eaten for breakfast, plus smoke from coal fires, plus horse manure from the streets. Plus, well, you get me. You get the idea? The smell would be intense, like a physical presence following you around. Something you could taste in the air. Your breathing naturally slows. Settling deeper into this strange world where staying clean was a daily struggle nobody really won. And that was just personal hygiene. We haven't even talked about the streets yet. Oh, the streets. London in the 1850s was home to about 2 million people. That's a lot of people making a lot of mess. And there was no organized garbage collection, no street cleaning. People just threw their garbage out the window into the street where it would sit and rot and attract rats. Human waste was, well, that's a whole other story. Most houses didn't have toilets. Instead, people used chamber pots. Basically, you do your business in a pot under your bed, and then, well, someone had to empty it. Usually into the street or into a shared privy in the backyard, or if you were really lazy, just out the window. There were people called night soil men who would come around and empty the cesspools and privies. But they only worked at night because the job was considered too disgusting for daylight hours. And where did all that waste go? Well, mostly into the Thames. London's main river, the same river people got their drinking water from. Yeah, think about that for a minute. You settle deeper into your bed, muscles relaxing as you try to imagine living in a world where the river you drink from is also the place everyone dumps their sewage. The horses made it worse. London ran on horsepower. Thousands and thousands of horses pulling carriages, delivery wagons, omnibuses, and horses, well, horses poop a lot. It was estimated that a single horse produced about 35 pounds of manure per day. Multiply that by thousands of horses and, well, you do the math. All of this waste would pile up in the streets. When it rained, it would wash around, creating these, let's call them rivers of nastiness. When it was dry, it would bake in the sun and create clouds of dust. Dust that was, well, let's just say you didn't want to breathe it. And yet, people did breathe it every day. They walked through it. They lived with it. They thought it was normal because, well, everyone smelled the same. When everyone's environment is gross, gross becomes normal. That's it. Getting more comfortable. Your muscles melting into the mattress as you think about how lucky you are to live in a time with soap and running water and actual garbage collection. The thing is, Victorians weren't stupid. They knew things were unpleasant. They just didn't really understand why people kept getting sick. They had this theory called miasma theory that basically said diseases were caused by bad air. Bad smells. They thought if you could smell something foul, it could make you sick. Which, I mean, they weren't completely wrong. Bad smells usually meant bad sanitation. And bad sanitation definitely led to disease. But they thought the smell itself was the problem, not the underlying conditions causing the smell. So, their solution was perfume. Lots and lots of perfume. Instead of fixing the source of the smell, they just tried to cover it up. Rich people would douse themselves in expensive fragrances. Poor people would use whatever they could find. Maybe some cheap cologne or flowers or herbs. But here's the thing about trying to cover up the smell of unwashed bodies, unwashed clothes, and sewage-filled streets with perfume. It doesn't really work. It just creates this weird sickly sweet combination that's somehow worse than the original smell. Imagine vanilla air freshener mixed with, well, a porta potty. That's basically what wealthy Victorians smelled like. A comfortable sigh escapes and you're so grateful for modern understanding of hygiene and disease. Women had it particularly rough. Their clothing was even more complicated than men's. Layers and layers of heavy fabric, corsets that made breathing difficult, long skirts that dragged on the ground, picking up everything, and they were expected to look perfect at all times. Makeup existed, but it was dangerous. Face powder often contained lead. Rouge contained mercury. And since people didn't understand what these chemicals could do to the human body, well, many Victorian women were literally poisoning themselves in the name of beauty. Hair dye was even worse. There was this popular product called Hall's Hair Renewer that promised to hide gray hair and restore youthful color. The secret ingredient? Lead. People were rubbing lead directly into their scalps, wondering why they felt sick all the time. Your shoulders drop, releasing tension, as you think about how much we've learned about chemistry and safety. And then there were the beauty routines. Without modern skincare, people came up with interesting solutions. They'd use lemon juice to lighten freckles, butter to moisturize dry skin, raw meat as face masks. They'd sleep with slices of raw beef on their faces, thinking it would keep them looking young. The smell in a Victorian bedroom, especially a wealthy Victorian bedroom with all these beauty treatments, must have been complex. Raw meat, lead-based cosmetics, unwashed hair with rancid pomade, and whatever perfume they were using to try to cover it all up. But you know what? They made do. They adapted. They found ways to feel clean and attractive within the constraints of their world. It's actually kind of impressive when you think about it. They were working with what they had, doing their best with the knowledge available to them. Getting cozy now. Really settling in. And there's something almost admirable about their resourcefulness, even if their methods were questionable. The wealthy had servants to help with the worst of it. Maids to empty chamber pots. Laundresses to deal with the clothes, bath attendants to heat and carry water. But the servants themselves, well, they were often even dirtier than their employers. They couldn't afford to take time for personal hygiene when they were busy maintaining everyone else's. Poor people just did their best, shared resources, helped each other out, and accepted that being clean was a luxury they couldn't afford. They focused on survival, on finding enough food to eat, enough work to pay rent, enough coal to keep warm. Hygiene was, well, hygiene was something you worried about when you had everything else figured out. And in 1850-something London, most people definitely did not have everything else figured out. Nice and easy. Breathing deeply as you imagine trying to navigate daily life in a world where everything was harder, where taking a bath was an event that required planning, where brushing your teeth was a luxury, where staying clean was a constant battle against a dirty world. The funny thing is, they probably would have looked at our modern obsession with cleanliness and thought we were crazy. Daily showers, changing clothes every day, washing our hands multiple times a day. They would have worried we were washing away our natural defenses, making ourselves weak and susceptible to disease. Different times, different knowledge, different priorities. But underneath all the dirt and smell and questionable hygiene practices, these were still people. Still families trying to make the best life they could for themselves and their children. They fell in love, told jokes, worried about money, celebrated birthdays. They had hopes and dreams and fears just like anyone else. They just smelled a lot worse while doing it. Settling deeper, that heavy, comfortable feeling spreading through your body as the strange world of Victorian London starts to feel a little more real, a little more human despite all its challenges and unpleasant realities. But let's talk about something that'll really make you appreciate modern plumbing. Victorian toilets, or well, the lack thereof. You know that bathroom down the hall? The one with running water and toilet paper and a seat that's actually comfortable? Yeah, forget about it. Most Victorians had never seen anything like that. Instead, they had alternatives. Your muscles relax as you think about how simple it is to just walk to the bathroom when you need to. If you were poor, and again, most people were, you shared an outhouse with maybe 100 other families. Picture this. One wooden shack built over a deep pit in a shared courtyard behind a row of houses. No privacy, no paper. No way to wash your hands afterward. Just a hole in the ground with a wooden seat over it. The smell, oh my god, the smell. especially in summer. It was like a physical wall you had to walk through just to get close to the thing. And the flies. So many flies. They'd swarm around the opening, and you just have to deal with it. A yawn escapes and you're suddenly very grateful for indoor plumbing. The wealthy had it better, but not by much. They had these things called water closets, basically. Early toilets that were installed right in the house. Sounds fancy, right? Well, here's the catch. They didn't have modern plumbing. So, where did all that waste go? Straight down into a cesspool in the basement. Yeah, a big open pit of human waste directly under the house, just sitting there fermenting. The idea was that eventually someone would come and empty it. But well, that didn't always happen on schedule. When the cesspool got full, the smell would start seeping up through the floorboards. The whole house would reek. People would wake up in the morning feeling sick from the fumes that had been building up overnight. So they'd call the night soil men. These were the guys who specialized in emptying cesspools and privies. They only worked at night because, well, the job was considered too disgusting for daylight hours. Can you imagine? The work was so gross that it was literally illegal to do it when people could see. Your breathing naturally slows, settling deeper as you try to imagine living above a basement full of sewage. These night soil men would show up with shovels and buckets and, well, they'd dig. They'd haul buckets of human waste up from the basement and load it onto carts. The smell during this process was indescribable. Neighbors would close their windows and stuff rags under their doors, but the stench would still seep in. And where did all this waste go? Well, that's where it gets interesting. See, human waste was actually valuable. Farmers needed fertilizer, and human poop makes excellent fertilizer. So, the night soil men would sell it. They'd cart it out to farms outside the city and sell it to farmers who would spread it on their fields. Which means the vegetables you'd eat for dinner were literally grown in human waste from the city, where people were dying of cholera and typhoid and God knows what else. This cycle was, well, it was pretty gross when you think about it. Getting more comfortable. And honestly, thinking about their farming practices makes you appreciate modern agriculture. But here's the thing, even this system was breaking down by the 1850s. London was just too big. Too many people producing too much waste. The night soil men couldn't keep up. Cesspools were overflowing. Streets were flooded with sewage when it rained. And diseases were spreading like wildfire. People were getting desperate. Some folks just gave up on the cesspool system entirely. They dumped their chamber pots directly into the street or out the window or into the nearest river or stream. And guess what? All those rivers and streams led to the Thames, London's main source of drinking water. So people were literally drinking water contaminated with their own sewage and wondering why they kept getting sick. Your shoulders drop. Releasing that tension as you think about how obvious the connection seems now. The government knew there was a problem. Scientists knew there was a problem. Hell, everyone with a nose knew there was a problem, but nobody could agree on what to do about it. Some people thought the solution was to build more cesspools. Others wanted to dump everything into the Thames and let the river carry it away. Still others thought they should just live with it. After all, London had always smelled bad. Why change now? And then came the summer of 1858. Oh boy, the summer of 1858. It was hot. Like really hot. Temperatures that London just wasn't used to. Day after day of blazing sun and no rain. The Thames started running low, leaving thick deposits of sewage on the riverbanks. And in that heat, well, things started to ferment. The smell was beyond description. Imagine every gross smell you've ever encountered. Multiply it by 1,000, and then imagine having to breathe it 24 hours a day. People were vomiting just from walking near the river. Families were abandoning their homes if they lived too close to the Thames. A comfortable sigh escapes and you're so thankful for modern waste management. The press started calling it the Great Stink. And it was great, in the worst possible way. Charles Dickens wrote about it, calling the Thames a deadly sewer in the place of a fine fresh river. Scientists took boat trips along the river, dropping pieces of white paper into the water to test how dirty it was. The paper disappeared instantly into the brown, soupy mess. But you know what finally got the government to act? When the smell reached Parliament. See, the Houses of Parliament sit right on the banks of the Thames. And in the summer of 1858, with the windows open for ventilation, well, the smell just poured in. Members of Parliament were literally fleeing the chamber, handkerchiefs pressed to their noses, gagging and retching. They tried dousing the curtains with lime and chloride to mask the smell. It didn't work. They even considered relocating the entire government away from Westminster. That's how bad it was. The smell was so horrific that they were willing to abandon their brand new expensive Parliament building rather than deal with it. Finally, they decided to do something about the sewage. That's it. Just relaxing into the story, thinking about how sometimes it takes a crisis to force change. They put a guy named Joseph Bazalgette in charge of fixing London's sewage problem. Poor bastard. Can you imagine getting that job? Hey Joe, we need you to figure out what to do with 2.5 million people's worth of poop and we need it done yesterday. But Bazalgette was brilliant. He came up with a plan that was, well, it was audacious. He wanted to build a completely new sewer system for the entire city. Not just patch the old one. Build a brand new one from scratch. The plan involved building over 1,000 miles of new sewers under London streets. These sewers would connect to main intercepting sewers that would carry all the waste downstream away from the city center. Way downstream. Like 8 miles downstream where it would be dumped into the Thames at high tide. The scale of the project was insane. They had to dig up half the city, demolish entire neighborhoods, relocate thousands of families, build massive pumping stations to move the sewage uphill, line everything with millions of bricks, create embankments along the Thames to house the new sewers. Your breathing slows nice and easy as you imagine the incredible amount of work this must have required. It took years of constant construction, constant noise, constant disruption. Streets torn up everywhere. The smell of cement and brick dust mixing with the smell of sewage. Workers covered in mud and worse, digging tunnels deep underground. And the cost, oh, the cost. In today's money, we're talking about billions of pounds, maybe tens of billions. The government had to raise taxes, issue bonds, borrow money from banks. People complained constantly about the expense. But you know what? It worked. When the new sewer system finally came online, the change was immediate. The smell disappeared. The Thames started running cleaner. Disease rates plummeted. People could actually walk along the river without gagging. It was like magic. All those years of living with the stench and suddenly it was just gone. Settling deeper into your bed, feeling that heavy, comfortable weight, and thinking about how amazing it must have felt to finally be able to breathe clean air. The new system wasn't perfect, of course. They were still dumping raw sewage into the Thames, just further downstream where it was someone else's problem, and the pumping stations broke down sometimes, causing temporary backups and overflows. But compared to what they'd been living with, it was a miracle. Unfortunately, not everyone benefited equally. The wealthy neighborhoods got connected to the new system first. The poor areas, well, they had to wait, sometimes for years. So, while the rich were enjoying their new odor-free lives, the poor were still dealing with overflowing cesspools and sewage in the streets. Some things never change, right? But even for the poor, things gradually got better as more areas got connected to the new system. Public health improved across the board. Cholera outbreaks became less frequent. Typhoid rates dropped. People stopped dying from diseases that were entirely preventable. A yawn slips out, and you're thinking about how much we take for granted. Clean water, functioning sewers, toilet paper. Speaking of toilet paper, yeah, that wasn't really a thing yet. The first commercially produced toilet paper wasn't sold until the 1870s, and even then it was expensive and not very common. So, what did people use? Well, whatever they could find. Old newspapers were popular among the middle class. Corn cobs were common in rural areas, leaves if you could find them, rags that could be washed and reused. The wealthy might have soft cloths or even sponges, but most people just made do with whatever was available. And since there was no running water in most bathrooms, well, hand washing after using the toilet wasn't exactly standard practice. Which brings us back to disease. So much disease. Cholera was the big killer. It would sweep through London in waves, killing thousands of people at a time. Poor areas were hit hardest because they had the worst sanitation. But the disease didn't discriminate. Rich people died too. And doctors had no idea what caused it. Remember, this was before germ theory. Before people understood that diseases were caused by bacteria and viruses. They thought cholera was caused by bad air. By breathing in the foul smells from sewage and rotting garbage. Your muscles relax, sinking deeper into the mattress as you think about how scary it must have been to live in a world where disease struck randomly, and doctors couldn't explain why. So, their treatments were, well, let's call them creative. They'd try to purify the air with strong-smelling herbs. They'd burn sulfur or tar to create smoke that would supposedly chase away the disease. They'd give patients massive doses of opium or alcohol, thinking it would help them fight off the infection. None of it worked, of course. People kept dying. Families would lose multiple members in a single outbreak. Children were especially vulnerable. And through it all, the sewage kept flowing into the Thames, the same river people were drinking from. There was this one doctor, John Snow, who figured out the connection between contaminated water and cholera. He proved that people were getting sick from drinking sewage-contaminated water, not from breathing bad air. But nobody believed him. The medical establishment thought he was crazy. It wasn't until years later, after the Great Stink and the new sewer system, that people started to accept his theory. By then, thousands of people had died needlessly, nice and easy. Just breathing and thinking about how frustrating it must have been to know the solution, but not be able to convince anyone to listen. Even after the sewers were built, old habits died hard. People were so used to dumping waste wherever was convenient that they kept doing it. Chamber pots still went out windows. Garbage still got thrown into the street. Factory waste still flowed into rivers. It took a generation for people to really change their behavior, to understand that where you put your waste actually mattered. That rivers weren't just convenient dumps. They were water sources that other people depended on. The new sewer system helped, but it wasn't a complete solution. It was more like a really good start. A foundation that future generations could build on. And build on it they did. Over the decades that followed, London kept improving its sanitation systems. They added treatment plants. They built better pumps. They connected more neighborhoods. They started regulating what factories could dump into the sewers. Slowly, very slowly, London transformed from one of the dirtiest cities in the world to one of the cleanest. Your breathing naturally deepens, settling into that warm, heavy feeling as you think about the incredible transformation that happened over just a few decades. The irony is that all this infrastructure, the sewers, the treatment plants, the regulations, it's basically invisible to most people. You turn on a tap and clean water comes out. You flush a toilet and waste disappears. You walk down the street and it doesn't smell like an open sewer. We don't think about it because it works so well. Because people like Bazalgette did their job so thoroughly that we can just take it for granted. But for Victorians, especially in those years before the construction of London's new sewer system, dealing with human waste was a constant daily challenge. Every trip to the privy was unpleasant. And drinking water was risky due to contamination. The air was thick with the smell of decay and disease, which people simply accepted because they didn't know any better. Sanitation habits were poor. And running water was rare, so hand-washing after using the toilet was not common practice. Disease, especially cholera, was rampant and deadly. sweeping through the city in waves and killing thousands at a time. Poor neighborhoods suffered the most due to their lack of sanitation, but no one was immune. At the time, doctors had no understanding of germs or bacteria. Instead, they believed diseases like cholera were caused by bad air, from foul smells. Treatments were ineffective and sometimes harmful, involving burning herbs, sulfur, and administering large doses of opium or alcohol. People continued to die in large numbers, with entire families affected. A pioneering doctor named John Snow discovered that cholera was linked to contaminated water, not bad air, but his ideas were initially rejected by the medical establishment. It wasn't until after the construction of the new sewer system and the Great Stink Crisis that his theory gained acceptance. Even after the sewers were built, old habits persisted. Waste was still dumped into streets and rivers, and it took a generation for people to change their behaviors and understand the importance of proper sanitation. The new sewer system was only the beginning. Over the following decades, London continued to improve its infrastructure, adding treatment plants, better pumps, and regulations to limit industrial pollution. These efforts gradually transformed London from one of the dirtiest cities to one of the cleanest. Though much of this work remained invisible to everyday citizens who simply enjoyed clean water and odor-free streets without realizing the massive effort behind it. Life in Victorian London was shaped by these difficult conditions. Clothing styles, such as dark colors and heavy fabrics, were practical choices to hide dirt and stains in a filthy environment. Women's long skirts protected their legs from street grime. Despite the challenges, people found ways to live full lives, falling in love, creating art, and building communities. Women faced particular hardships with menstrual hygiene. Without modern sanitary products, most relied on homemade rags that had to be washed and reused. A difficult and often embarrassing task due to lack of privacy and the social stigma around menstruation. Wealthier women had slightly better options, but even they dealt with limited choices and intrusive servants. Medical misconceptions about menstruation were common, with some doctors prescribing harmful treatments like mercury or bloodletting. Victorian medicine overall was experimental and frequently dangerous. Treatments like bloodletting were based on flawed ideas, and mercury was prescribed for a range of ailments despite its toxicity. Opium was widely used as a remedy for pain, insomnia, and even infant teething, leading to widespread addiction problems. The passage emphasizes the resilience and ingenuity of people living through these harsh conditions and highlights the enormous public health improvements made during the Victorian era. It showcases how political will, engineering advances, and gradual social change combined to create the modern urban environment we often take for granted today. In Victorian England, opium was widely used as a medicine and was easily available over the counter in pharmacies, often without any prescription. Products like laudanum, essentially liquid opium, were sold just like aspirin today. Housewives took it for menstrual cramps and often became addicted unintentionally. Workers used it to relieve back pain and found themselves dependent, while children were given opium-based syrups for minor illnesses, sometimes developing addictions before they could even walk. Addiction wasn't understood medically at the time and was seen as a moral failing rather than a disease. Surgery in the Victorian era was extremely dangerous. There was no anesthesia until late in the period, so patients were fully conscious during operations and had to be held down, while surgeons worked quickly to minimize pain. Pain management was minimal, often just a shot of whiskey and a leather strap to bite. Infections were common and deadly because doctors did not understand sterilization or hand washing. Hospitals were often more dangerous than staying at home. Dentistry was similarly harsh. Most people endured toothaches until extraction was unavoidable. Teeth were pulled without anesthesia using crude tools, often by barbers or blacksmiths. Wealthy people might afford dentures made from wood, animal teeth, or even human teeth. But these were uncomfortable and rotted easily. Many people lived toothless, eating soft foods and mumbling speech. Despite these hardships, beauty standards were strict. Pale skin was fashionable because it signified wealth and not working outdoors. Women used parasols, gloves, and veils to protect their skin, and applied makeup made with toxic substances like lead and mercury, unknowingly poisoning themselves for the sake of appearance. Hairstyling was laborious, and infrequent washing led to buildup of sticky substances and scalp infections. Wealthy women wore elaborate wigs that were heavy, hot, and attracted lice. Men faced their own grooming difficulties. Shaving was done with dangerous straight razors shared among customers at barbershops, increasing the risk of infections. Many men grew mustaches and beards, which trapped dirt and dust from polluted Victorian air but were easier and safer to maintain. Public baths became popular as many people lacked bathing facilities at home. These communal pools were social centers but had poor hygiene, with infrequent water changes and no bacterial treatment, making them hotspots for disease transmission. Nonetheless, they were treasured as rare opportunities for full-body washing. Overall, this passage highlights how hazardous and uncomfortable everyday life was in Victorian times, from medicine and hygiene to beauty and grooming, underscoring how much modern medicine and sanitation have improved our quality of life. In Victorian times, privacy was a rare luxury, and social norms around cleanliness and hygiene were very different from today. Despite harsh conditions, people took pride in small acts of cleanliness, like keeping their hands and faces clean, and valued good grooming and pleasant breath as markers of dignity. They adapted to foul smells and discomforts that modern people would find unbearable, showing remarkable resilience. Children grew up surrounded by filth and disease but still found joy in play and social connection. Even wealthy families, though better protected, faced high childhood mortality and lived without antibiotics, vaccines, or basic hygiene knowledge. Families had many children, knowing some would not survive to adulthood, yet life was full of love, celebrations, and hope. Food hygiene was a major challenge. Refrigeration didn't exist, and ice was expensive, so most food was stored at room temperature and spoiled quickly. To preserve food, people relied heavily on salt curing, smoking, and pickling, methods that extended shelf life but often made food tough, salty, or vinegar-flavored, and sometimes carcinogenic. Sometimes, people simply ate food starting to spoil, masking off bad parts or heavily spicing dishes to try to avoid sickness, without understanding bacteria or foodborne illness. People often fell ill after eating spoiled food but blamed bad air or superstition. Milk was especially dangerous since vendors diluted it with contaminated water, unknowingly poisoning consumers. And infant formula didn't exist. Mothers unable to breastfeed used cow or goat milk, often spoiled, contributing to high infant mortality. Food preparation was unhygienic, dirty kitchens, unwashed knives, and no awareness of cross-contamination meant bacteria spread easily. Working conditions worsened the problem. Factory workers, miners, and agricultural laborers handled toxic substances, soot, and manure all day, then ate without washing, spreading disease further. Many believed illness was caused by moral failings or supernatural forces rather than poor hygiene. The revolutionary idea that hand-washing could prevent illness saved millions of lives later on. Even wealthy households weren't safe. Though they had trained cooks and more varied diets, imported exotic foods often sat unrefrigerated for months, becoming spoiled or infested. Elaborate multi-course dinner parties lasted hours, leaving food out at room temperature and increasing risk of foodborne illness. Wealthy Victorians also enjoyed unusual foods like potted meat, a fatty, spiced meat paste, which was part of their strange culinary preferences. Overall, the passage highlights how Victorian people coped with difficult conditions around privacy, hygiene, and food safety, showing human resilience but also how precarious life was before modern public health and food safety systems. Victorian food and hygiene conditions were harsh and shaped by the constant threat of disease and contamination. People consumed fermented foods and delicacies that today sound horrifying. like maggot-infested cheese, because fermentation was seen as sophisticated and helped preserve food. The poor faced severe food insecurity, often forced to buy second-hand or spoiled food from markets and street vendors selling meat pies made from questionable meat, sour milk, or bread mixed with sawdust. Hunger meant people ate whatever they could get, regardless of safety. Alcohol, particularly low alcohol, small beer, was often safer than water. So it was consumed by people of all ages, even children and babies, leading to a society where mild intoxication was common, helping them cope with daily hardships. The heavy use of spices in Victorian cooking was partly to mask the taste of spoiled food. There were no public health inspections or regulations to ensure food safety. Eating contaminated food was considered bad luck or fate rather than a preventable cause of illness. Food fraud was rampant, milk was watered down, beer diluted, and bread adulterated with chalk or alum, with no legal repercussions. Buyers had to trust vendors blindly, a risky gamble. The wealthy tried to protect themselves by hiring food tasters or buying from trusted sources but still fell ill. Poor families had little choice but to risk sickness to avoid starvation. Child mortality from digestive illnesses was tragically high because children's immune systems couldn't handle the constant exposure to contaminated food and water. Food safety laws were only introduced late in the Victorian era and were weak and poorly enforced at first. It took decades of scientific research, political lobbying, and public pressure to improve conditions, which eventually saved millions of lives. Alongside food safety, personal hygiene standards began improving slowly. The wealthy led changes. Able to afford soap and clean water and pressured by social expectations to maintain appearances, middle-class families started bathing more often and buying better grooming products. However, many still believed too much bathing was unhealthy, so habits changed slowly. Poor workers, facing long hours and little income, found it difficult to spend money on soap or time for baths, making true cleanliness an impossible luxury. Social attitudes began linking cleanliness to morality and success, stigmatizing dirtiness as laziness or immorality, which pressured people to at least appear clean by washing visible parts like hands and faces. Soap production evolved during this period. Early Victorian soaps were expensive and harsh, made from lye and animal fats that could damage skin. Advances in manufacturing made soap cheaper and gentler, and different soaps for different purposes emerged, such as gentle facial soaps, strong laundry soaps, and medicated options for skin conditions. This was revolutionary because it allowed ordinary people to access products tailored to their needs, improving hygiene. Advertising played a significant role in changing attitudes. Soap companies ran campaigns linking cleanliness to beauty, health, and social success, showing before and after images and crafting narratives about the social benefits of being clean. These marketing efforts helped shape public perception, encouraging more widespread adoption of regular hygiene practices despite the many obstacles of the time. In sum, the passage illustrates how Victorian society struggled with food safety and personal hygiene amidst extreme challenges. Despite limited knowledge and harsh living conditions, people adapted and gradually improved their standards, laying the groundwork for modern public health and hygiene systems we benefit from today. The hygiene standards and health practices of the Victorian era may seem ridiculous by today's standards, but they were surprisingly effective in their own context. They helped create a culture where cleanliness was increasingly seen as important, desirable, and achievable. Just breathing in this shift, you realize how powerful marketing was in changing entire cultural attitudes toward hygiene. Medical understanding was gradually improving as well. The germ theory of disease, which explained that illnesses were caused by invisible microbes rather than bad air or supernatural forces, was gaining acceptance among doctors. This groundbreaking discovery led to new recommendations on handwashing, wound care, and overall cleanliness. Doctors began telling patients to wash their hands before meals, keep wounds clean and covered, and avoid sharing eating utensils. These precautions seem obvious now but were revolutionary at the time, as people had never connected personal hygiene with preventing disease. Hospitals slowly began adopting basic sanitation measures, such as sterilizing instruments between patients, requiring hand-washing by medical staff, and isolating contagious patients. As these practices spread, death rates in hospitals dropped dramatically, confirming that cleanliness really was tied to health, not just social status. Relaxing deeper, you feel the awe at how this understanding transformed lives. Schools played a vital role in spreading hygiene knowledge. Children learned about washing hands, brushing teeth, and keeping their clothes clean, then brought these lessons home, gradually improving practices throughout communities, especially in poorer areas where adults had little access to medical knowledge. Public health campaigns started educating the public with posters showing how to wash hands properly, dispose of waste safely, and maintain clean homes. Though often funded by soap companies and businesses that benefited from better hygiene, these efforts delivered valuable health education. The message was simple but revolutionary. Being clean keeps you healthy, and taking care of your body is within your control. Settling deeper, you imagine the empowerment people must have felt, knowing they could actively protect their health. Yet, despite all hardships, people still took pride in their appearance and found joy in life. Victorian women, even with limited resources, would spend hours preparing for special occasions, washing faces and hands with whatever soap they could afford, brushing hair through weeks of oils and styling products, putting on their best dresses and treasured jewelry, dabbing perfume on their wrists, hoping it would last. And you know what? They felt beautiful and special, ready to face the world. Because true beauty isn't about perfect hygiene or expensive products, but about feeling good in your own skin, no matter how it smelled. The wealthy had more resources and servants to help with grooming, but they faced the same fundamental limits: no running water, no understanding of germs, no effective medicine. Interestingly, many servants were dirtier than their employers. Maids spent days cleaning other people but returned to overcrowded, unsanitary homes. Butlers wore gloves and polished silver while their own hands remained unwashed. Cleanliness became a social status marker. If you could afford to be clean, you were successful. If not, you were poor and unfairly judged morally deficient. This social pressure drove working-class people to obsessively clean visible areas and clothing to hide their struggles. You release a breath, thinking about how unfair it was to judge character by things beyond control. Change came slowly, but a turning point arrived with the Great Stink of 1858. The overwhelming smell of untreated sewage in the Thames River disrupted London so badly that Parliament was forced to act. Joseph Bazalgette's revolutionary sewer system wasn't just about waste removal. It fundamentally changed perceptions of sanitation and public health. It proved that engineering and government action could solve problems once thought impossible, improving daily life measurably. When the new sewers made the stench disappear, it was like magic. People who had lived breathing foul air suddenly walked the Thames embankments without gagging. Property values soared, abandoned neighborhoods revived, and struggling businesses flourished. You sink deeper into comfort, imagining the relief and hope this change inspired. Psychologically, it was enormous. People realized terrible living conditions were not inevitable, that life could get better. This sparked urban reform movements demanding better housing, cleaner streets, and safer workplaces. Women were key leaders, intimately aware of the toll on family health and hygiene. They formed organizations advocating for public health, child welfare, sanitation reforms, cleaner water, and improved medical care for the poor. They fought not just for comfort but for basic human dignity, the right to live in conditions that allowed families to thrive. This era's story is one of resilience, slow but steady progress, and the power of knowledge and collective action to transform lives. During the Victorian era, people lived in extremely challenging conditions, with poor sanitation, widespread disease, and little understanding of germs. Illnesses were often blamed on bad air, moral failings, or bad luck rather than microorganisms, which were not yet widely accepted as the cause of disease. Thanks to pioneering scientists like Louis Pasteur, the medical community began to understand that germs caused diseases. This discovery led to important recommendations about handwashing, wound care, and general cleanliness, practices that were revolutionary at the time but are now fundamental to health. Change was slow because old beliefs were deeply rooted, and many people didn't have access to clean water, soap, or medical knowledge. However, schools began teaching children about hygiene, doctors emphasized prevention, and public health campaigns promoted sanitation. Soap became more affordable and gentler, allowing more people to maintain personal cleanliness. Advertising and social pressure helped shift cultural attitudes, making cleanliness not just a personal virtue but a mark of social respectability. Despite harsh conditions, people found pride in their appearance and moments of joy in daily life. Even Victorian women with limited resources spent hours preparing for special occasions, and children played and laughed despite their surroundings. The wealthy had more resources for cleanliness but still faced many of the same basic limitations, such as the absence of antibiotics, vaccines, or running water. The Victorian era also saw dramatic infrastructure improvements. The construction of Basildgate's sewer system transformed London, removing foul smells and waste, making the city more livable and encouraging urban renewal. Public health movements emerged, driven in large part by women advocating for better housing, sanitation, and child welfare. These efforts were aimed at securing basic human dignity, the right to live in conditions that wouldn't make people sick and the hope that children would survive into adulthood. Food safety was a major concern. Without refrigeration or knowledge of bacteria, people relied on questionable preservation methods like salting, smoking, and pickling. Contaminated food and water caused frequent illness and high child mortality. Many poor families had no choice but to consume spoiled or unsafe food, while alcohol was often used instead of unsafe water. The first food safety laws appeared late in the era but were poorly enforced initially. By the end of the Victorian period, gradual improvements in hygiene, sanitation, food safety, and medical understanding led to significant health gains. Mortality rates declined, and people began to believe that a cleaner, healthier life was not only possible but a right for all social classes. This shift laid the foundation for modern public health. Today, we benefit from clean water, safe food, effective medicines, and hygiene practices that protect us daily. The comfort of our modern lives, the ability to brush our teeth with safe toothpaste, drink clean tap water, eat uncontaminated food, and sleep in clean, well-ventilated homes, is the direct result of the struggles and reforms initiated by Victorian reformers. Though they often did not live to see the full benefits of their work, their vision and determination set humanity on a path toward better health and dignity for everyone. As you reflect on this history, feel the deep appreciation for the invisible systems that keep you safe, and let yourself relax fully, sinking into peaceful, restorative sleep surrounded by the comfort their efforts have made possible.